Hi there. If you're watching this on YouTube, or you're wanting to watch any of my content on my channel, or both for that matter, I would strongly recommend hitting the subscribe button and comment and like on any videos if you may wish, because this is a general audience channel. Also, this video is not made for kids, it is for older fans and adults alike. So please sit back and enjoy the video. Sodor Engines Part 3 Jim the Jinx. Based on the original story by Ryan Healy and Douglas Roberts, adapted, edited, and told by julyleonard. "That manager of yours," said Mike, "sounds like a horrid man. Sending all those engines off for scrap like that? What a waste!" Duke chuckled. He had fond memories of the old manager of the Mid-Sodor Railway, and was quick to defend him. "I know I've painted him out in an unfavorable light, but he was a kind man who stood no nonsense from his engines, particularly those who reoffended. Smudger, Stanley, Andreas, and Albert didn't deserve to be saved. They showed no remorse or guilt. But one engine we all recall was saved." Peter Sam knew who exactly Duke meant. Peter Sam knew exactly who Duke meant. "You mean Jim the Jinx, don't you, Grandpa?" "Ah, yes. Poor old Jim was always falling foul of something. A sensible and kindly young engine, but plagued with bad luck. Whoever would have thought one of his own misadventures would have been what had saved him?" Poor Jim never sought trouble, but it seemed to follow him wherever he went, and at times would be several strides ahead waiting for him. One morning, there was a terrible noise screaming towards the workstation. Jim puffed in with his whistle jammed, blowing loud and relentless. "Stop it!" cried Jim, sobbing in a state of panic. "Please, someone stop it!" The engines looked on in horror as a workman leapt across the platform, brandishing a hammer, and slammed it into Jim's whistle, finally silencing it and breaking it at the same time. "Thank goodness for that," the manager sighed. "What on earth happened, Jim?" "We blew the whistle to try and shift some sheep out of the way, and a pin fell out of my whistle." "Everything seems to happen to you, doesn't it, Jim?" "I'm truly sorry, sir." "Oh, don't worry, Jim. It wasn't your fault. It could happen to any engine. We'll get you a new whistle in due course, but in the meantime, I'm afraid you'll be out of service for a while until I can make other arrangements." That night in the shed, Jim was anxious. Duke and Stuart were sympathetic and tried to cheer him up, but Falcon, on the other hand, was being rather rude. "It's not your fault, isn't it? You're just jinxed," he teased. "Jim the Jinx, that's what you'll be known as from now on." "That's enough, Falcon," burst out Duke. "At least he's not reckless enough to blindly career off the side. Jim here is just plain unfortunate." "Maybe Falcon's right," put in Tim, who was one of the more pragmatic and pessimistic engines on the line. "Jim is prone to mishap, you know." "He's jinxed," Falcon muttered under his breath. "It could happen to any engine, Jim," Duke said softly. "Don't listen to him." "Yes, but it always happens to me, though, Duke," groaned Jim. "It's so unfair." Jim went unhappily to sleep. He couldn't help these unfortunate happenings and hoped desperately that the manager would realize that too. The next morning, as there were no spare whistles on site, other arrangements were put in place for Jim. For the time being, he was to shunt trucks in the quarries. The trucks knew all about Jim's jinx and were keen to take advantage. "Oh, look," they giggled in their silly way. "It's Jim the Jinx. Send for one of the others. Anything can happen when he's about. We want Duke or Stuart." Jim was standing no nonsense and decided to be firmer with them. "That's quite enough," he told them resolutely. "I'll stand no more of your nonsense." "Be careful, Jim," warned his driver. "This is exactly the sort of thing that can lead to accidents." But the trucks just kept on with their teasing, until at last Jim lost patience. When shunting them into place, he bumped them hard. Too hard. They flew forward and hurtled toward the buffers, smashing through and hitting the rock face with an ear-shattering crash. "Oops," said Jim meekly. The foreman was very cross. "You silly engine," he scolded. "Now we'll be delayed. Wait until manager hears about this." As soon as Jim had a new whistle fitted, the manager put him on to goods work in hopes that nothing else would go wrong. And for a while, it didn't. But he still had shadows of doubt about Jim and the Jinx that plagued him so. Hence why, when a consignment of gunpowder arrived on the railway, and Jim was the only engine available, he was reluctant to send him. "I don't like it. What if something goes wrong?" "We haven't even had a minor mishap for months," soothed his driver. "You'll be fine. So long as we're careful and safe, nothing will go wrong." "I hope you're right," puffed Jim thoughtfully. Jim puffed evenly and smoothly up the valley with his dangerous train. Everything was going well until he rounded another bend. "Oh, drat!" he groaned. "It's those rotten sheep again. Whatever will we do?" "We'll have to blow the whistle and startle them," advised the driver. "But what if we ignite the gunpowder?" "Blow loudly, Jim. It's the only way we'll get them off the line." He grabbed hold of Jim's whistle chain and gave it a great tug. He blew it long and loud, and it echoed over the fields and down the valley. "It's working! They're scattering! Well done, Jim!" The gunpowder was still safe and secure, and Jim sailed on through to the quarry to a chorus of cheers from the waiting workmen. "Perhaps I've beaten the Jinx once and for all," he thought cheerfully. But come winter, he would find that the Jinx hadn't subsided. It had just lain dormant. Duke was quick to warn the others of a ledge on the section that Jim worked, which could prove hazardous throughout the winter months. Stuart reiterated the importance of care in this section to Jim, who promised to take extra care. But the snowy weather worsened as the day wore on. Jim tried to give as much care and attention to his train as he could as they weaved their way down the line. "Can't afford to slip. Can't afford to slip," he puffed as he edged his way along. But the trucks had other ideas. "We'll give 'em the slip," they whispered to each other. "That'll teach 'em to mistreat us." As the driver began to ease the brakes on, they surged forward into him. "On, on, on!" they cried, and sent Jim skidding down the line. Jim's driver slammed his brakes on. At first, they were able to control the trucks, but as the track curved downwards, the force of the trucks gained momentum. "Not now!" exclaimed the driver. "Hold on, Jim!" Jim held on for dear life, but the icy rails kept him skating along toward the tunnel mouth and the sharp bend. Jim was in a state of pure panic and despair. "I can't hold them! My brakes have shattered!" With a horrifying shatter of wood and steel, Jim and his trucks flew off the sharp corner and hurtled into the valley below. His crew had jumped clear before the crash and ran to get help. Stuart and Falcon were in the yard when the manager came rushing across with the urgent and unfortunate news. "Jim's gone and thrown himself off the ledge. You'll need to take a maintenance crew and help him." When they arrived, the two engines could scarcely believe the damage that Jim had incurred, but remained hopeful that their friend would be okay. Work took a long time, and the engines spent the rest of the day in the freezing cold whilst Jim was repatriated and eventually hauled home, battered and broken, by a traction engine. When they arrived back at the yard, the engines were ordered to move Jim into the workshops. Much to their surprise, the manager was cheerfully discussing plans with the foreman. "Yes, we could do it with his cab removed. Might be a better proposition, actually." Stuart was anxious.
"I wonder what's going to happen to him."
"We can only wait and see," Duke said nobly. But even he feared the worst for the proper unfortunate Jim. Weeks passed, and nothing more was heard or said of Jim. But one morning, the engines received a very nice surprise standing as bold as brass in the workstation yard. "Good glory!" whistled Falcon. "It's Jim!"
"They've repaired me as good as new," smiled Jim. "I've never felt better."
"Perhaps he wasn't jinxed after all," chuckled Tim, admiring the work done on the newly overhauled Jim. "Took away his cab, though. Now he's like Atlas the mine engine," chuckled Duke. "So, Jim, what's the manager got planned for you?" "A boat trip to the mainland," said the manager. "That's the plan." "The boat, sir?" exclaimed the engines in unison. "Yes. You see, Jim's accident was a blessing in disguise. He was just unlucky, and our narrowing twisting line and his weak brakes didn't suit one another. However, we have found him a new home in the mainland, where I'm sure Jim will flourish."
"But, sir," said Stuart, "he's got no cab like Atlas."
The manager laughed and explained. "He won't need one. He'll be working on a sand quarries railway, flat, sandy, and good for fast running. Therefore, I wager there will be no more dangerous hazards to get in his way. And thanks to the money we've made through Jim's sale, we can finally make much needed improvements here. So everyone wins."
"I feel much better already," puffed Jim cheerfully. "Thank you for everything. It's been wonderful working with you all."
Jim was pushed into a low wagon, and the traction engine trundled off down the road track, to the chorus of the engines whistling until they were fit to burst. And although Jim never did return to the Mid-Sodor Railway, the engines had it on good authority that he was doing well in his new home, and the last they heard, he was the quarry's favorite engine. So I think it'd be safe to say that Jim wasn't a jinx anymore.